The headlines are telling you that the game's over, that the middle class is disappearing, that you're falling behind, the system's rigged. I don't know. Maybe that sounds familiar to you. I see it all the time on social media, on the news, with the politics, everything. You get a raise, you're poorer, your parents did less, but it feels like they had more. And every article you read tells you two things at the same time. It tells you that it's not your fault, and it tells you that there's also nothing you can do about it. That is programming. That is framing. We've done previous episodes on yellow journalism. This is somebody trying to plant the seed in your head to make you a victim, to keep you from being successful. Why they're doing that is because they get money regardless of the outcome for you. You're being shown a scoreboard that was not built to help you build wealth. It was built to plant seeds in people's minds, to poison their minds, to keep them engaged. You see the lawsuits with Facebook, you see it with social media about addiction, about creating systems that addict people to them. They can't get off them. They know what they're doing. They're getting you to tune in and then getting you hooked. You can't get out because it's designed to make you feel anxious. It's designed to make you dependent. When you're anxious and you're dependent, you rely on that. What's happening next? What's happening next? What's happening next? What's happening next? That kind of feeling that you've got pulsing through your veins right now. You need a hero. You need somebody to make it stop, somebody who can just fix it for you. You're judging your life through a distorted scoreboard, and that leads you to make bad decisions. Decisions that future self will look back at current self and regret. My goal is to help you avoid that. So today we are talking about switching scoreboards. How did the middle class decline become the loudest story in America? And why are the measurements behind it basically fake? People don't realize how shaky the stats are, if there's even stats at all. We'll get into that. More importantly, what moves the needle for your household so that you can break out of this story? You can move on with your life. You can find better things to focus on. It's like sitting in quicksand. Eventually, you're just going to drown in it. How do you get out of that? How do you move forward? So if you've ever felt like you're losing the game, maybe you didn't even know you were playing the game. Maybe that wasn't your plan. This podcast is for you. And if you feel like you're competing with the past, everything's being compared to the past, or maybe there's decisions you didn't make, or things you screwed up, or places you didn't go, or things you didn't do that you wanted to do that you needed to do. Maybe you think that there's no time to catch up, any of that stuff. This episode's for you. Let's start with a simple question. When the heck did tracking middle class wealth even become a thing in the United States? Why does it even matter? But when? What's the cause of this? Why? Why is this being forced on us? Why is this shaping our perspective of self-worth and whether or not our kids are going to have a better life than us and whether or not we can retire and all this other stuff? So the answer to that is we have to rewind the clock. In your head, think of a year when maybe this would have come to fruition, when tracking middle class wealth could have originated. 1913. If you had 1913, you win. If you had 1913, you know what happened in 1913. If you live in a high tax state where they're talking about taxing these wealth taxes, this probably really resonates with you. 1913 is when the federal income tax was created. In 1913, when the federal income tax was created, it wasn't anywhere like what it is today. But it kind of opened the floodgates for this ever-increasing tax burden that we have to deal with. In the 30s and 40s, researchers, because they need something to do, they started publishing early income distribution statistics. So basically, they were using that IRS data from 1913 on to start to make assumptions. Now, again, keep in mind, not everybody's filing taxes at that time. But they're doing it anyway. They're coming up with statistics. We're going to use that in the future here as we get further into the episode. After World War II, the policymakers, they shift their focus to what they call consumer stability, which makes sense. You've got all the social policies from FDR coming out. You've got Social Security, that kind of stuff. You've got the politics of we'll give people Social Security, you'll give us votes. We did some episodes on Social Security and where they came from and how that impacted people. But all of a sudden, we're talking about things like home ownership. We're talking about debt. We're talking about retirement security. And all of a sudden, we're doing consumer finance surveys. Surveys are useful. At that time, however, they weren't consistent. So useful, but not perfect. And one of the major problems is that income does not equal wealth. Huge issue for a lot of people that I talk to. They think people with high incomes are wealthy. Or they think people who had windfalls that ended up with a lot of income taxes are wealthy. Income is a potential indicator of wealth, but it does not help you understand how wealthy somebody is. So it might say that person probably has some money, but it in no way will help you understand how much money they actually have. There's another problem with all of this. There has never been a consistent definition of middle class. They keep it vague on purpose. We will talk about it, but the reason is because there's no household transparency. You can't look into somebody's house and understand everything that they own and everything associated with them and whatnot, and the history of their wealth. There's no record of any of that information across the board. By the 90s, the Federal Reserve has modernized the surveys. So we went from kind of non-standardized surveys that were kind of all over the board to standardizing or modernizing the questions that are being asked. But then for some reason, we're not going to get into today, the Federal Reserve oversampled wealthy households. So we have a lot of information on wealthy households. We don't have much information at all on what would be deemed non-wealthy households. Again, what's the definition of that? And that's when they started to compare the middle to the top and the bottom. Then in the 2000s, economists, they start to ask the question, and this has become maybe the most dangerous question in our lifetime, and it's leading a lot of the angst across the country. How does today's middle class compare to the middle class of the last century? Basically, how are we doing today compared to how we did in the past? And you hear this all the time on the news. And it's one of those things that it can be spun in just about any direction that you actually want to do it because, well, how does today's middle class compare to the middle class of the last century? Here's the issue with that question. We don't have robust, consistent household wealth data across time. You can't make the comparison. You can only make assumptions. So since you can't actually make the comparison because the data doesn't actually exist, there's a thing called reconstructionism. So the researchers actually, because they have so much time on their hands, they have nothing better to do, reconstruct the past using tax records, national balance sheets, assumptions about returns. Lots of assumptions. So think about tax records. Not everybody's filing a tax return. Not everything shows up on your tax return. Income does not equal wealth. We're using that as a basis to create assumptions over have and have-nots. National balance sheets. Again, then have to parse that data out. So there's a lot of assumptions about returns. What's the investment returns for person A versus person B? It's a really, really, really fraught thing. Like, it's too complex to be simplified. And this is critical because now we're no longer measuring reality. We're not saying we know this is what happened in the past and this is what's happening today. We're saying we've created a model using different data points from the past to recreate what we think the past looked like, which means it's not a fact. It's an opinion. They're like weather forecasts. They're useful, kind of. If you're a hiker, you're using the weather to figure out whether or not you should go hiking, you probably are disappointed most of the time. Nobody ever looks at the weather report and looks back and says, oh, it's 30 out of the last 45 times they were wrong. We should stop listening to them. We just always consistently look forward and go, look, we know they're going to be wrong sometimes or most of the time. So we're going to take it as guidance. And when they're wrong, you just go on and move on. But for some reason, with this middle class thing, we're hanging on to it like it's real. Like there can be no wrong in it. And you can't prove that the model is true. That's the problem. We can't prove it's true because it's an opinion. It's dependent on who feels that the assumptions are reasonable. And that is going to be personal bias. And once you have personal bias deciding whether or not something's reasonable, you've got all kinds of issues introduced. So before we accept the doom scroll, before we accept the fact that the model says this, we have to ask two questions. What's the model measuring? And why was it measured that way? And then there's fine print. And nobody wants to talk about this. But tax data, so some of the primary data that they're using is tax data, tax and estate planning data, or estate tax data. Historically undercounts huge categories of wealth. So income tax doesn't normally account for owner-occupied housing, so your house, what it's actually worth. It doesn't count for your pension. Doesn't account, for instance, you could have a $50,000 annual pension. That's really actually worth $1 million. So when somebody says, oh, middle class is losing millionaires, well, if a whole bunch of the middle class have $50,000 pensions, they're all millionaires. But that doesn't get counted as wealth. It gets counted as income. Stock options, non-taxable or underreported assets. It also struggles with what we can call real world wealth, which are small businesses. This is one of the problems with wealth taxes. How do you value a small business? Different topic for a different day, but it's not as easy as just throwing a number on it. Farms, land value, mineral rights, personal assets. I'm from an area in the country that had tons and tons and tons of fracking mineral rights. Millions and millions of dollars worth of that. That doesn't show up on a ledger anyplace. You don't know what those are worth. Yet you have farmers with 400 acres with enormous reserves of natural gas under them. So in other words, the middle class wealth lives in places that models can't see. Yes, wealthy people have wealth that lives in places that the models can't see as well. But if you assume that there's a direct correlation or relationship between how much a wealthy person has that you can't see and how much a non-wealthy person has, if you can even define that you can't see, I think that you're compounding your assumptions in a way that cannot possibly be accurate. So they use another type of data. They use estate taxes. And when you use estate taxes, you're only actually capturing the very richest filers, and you're only capturing what they had at death. So anyone below a certain threshold, anyone who planned around estate taxes, anyone whose wealth wasn't easily taxable, you're going to miss that stuff. And estate tax rules change over time, and thresholds don't keep up with inflation, and strategies evolve. And the data, frankly, is tied to mortality, not living households. So you have no clue what that person did up until, let's say, death. So you could be missing 70 years worth of wealth utilization. You have no idea. If somebody dies with no money, it doesn't mean that they didn't have any money in their lifetime. If somebody dies with a lot of money, it doesn't mean that they had money during their entire lifetime. And it also doesn't mean that they didn't lose half their money the year before they died. So when we're measuring wealth across generations, the definitions matter, and what we're actually looking at matters, and being critical about what we're looking at matters. If we're going to make conclusions that change the way that people behave and that create anxiety and force everybody onto, drugs to control the tremor in their hand because they're worried about what's going on with the market today or what the politicians are doing, we probably ought to have an honest conversation about the fact that most of this crap is just made up. Before the 1930s, pensions weren't even counted. Consumer credit barely existed. They couldn't account for that stuff in wealth comparisons, but they're trying to do it now. In the 30s and 50s, home equity was inconsistently valued. There was no way to figure out what your home was worth or how much equity you had in it. They didn't have computers at the time doing that kind of stuff. You can even argue now they can't. You can go with the assessed value or you can go with Zillow, but neither of those really match up with what happens when you go to sell your property. Nobody knows the shape of your property or anything like that. So home equity or the value of the property directly related with your house is very, very hard to value and put in there in comparisons. Employer pensions were off. They weren't on there in the 50s and the 70s. Again, from the 30s on, they weren't, but definitely in the 50s and 70s. In the 80s, you got the rise of stock options and private equity and deferred compensation. None of that stuff's in there. There's no way to track that with your tax returns until there becomes a liquidity event. So you don't know if somebody has $1 million of stock options until they exercise them. So there's just stuff that doesn't show up. And you could say, well, no, non-rich people don't have that stuff. Yes, they do. I work with people who wouldn't consider themselves wealthy all the time. They have those things. Now, I might consider them wealthy. You might consider them wealthy. They don't consider themselves wealthy. And that's part of the problem. What's the definition of a wealthy person? Is it somebody with $5 million? Is it somebody with $10 million? I can tell you, if you have $2 million, you don't consider a wealthy person somebody with $2 million. You probably consider it somebody with $5 million. And if you have $5 million, you probably don't consider wealth $5 million. You probably consider somebody with 10. And if you have $50,000, you probably consider somebody wealthy who has 250,000. So we're not really capturing all the data. We don't know. Basically, we don't know. And because we have first world problems in this country, instead of saying we don't know, we make up models. And then we compare ourselves to them. And then we get quotes like the middle class is shrinking compared to the past, whatever, ... Well, we are not comparing apples to apples. We are comparing different definitions, different blind spots, and different assumptions, and we're calling the output fact. It's not fact. There is no science to this. It does not exist. There's people's opinions and there's people's agendas, things that they want to push. Even the Federal Reserve warns against this. They talk about overinterpreting trends below the very top. And when they're talking very top, they're probably talking top, 0.10%. Like 0.1%, I guess is a better way to say that, or 0.5% of people. Because when you reconstruct models on data that is very sparse over a very large population, you're just not going to get accuracy. And honest researchers, and if you're a researcher or research and you're saying, oh, all researchers are honest. No, they're not. Lots of researchers are getting paid by somebody to produce a report that says something. So honest researchers, and you can look this up, will treat long-term comparisons as ranges, not precise points. Anytime they give it a precise point, they say, well, middle class is losing traction on the wealthier classes or whatever. The question is did they give you a precise point? Oh, it's down 10%. That's fake. They can give you a range. Look, in our research, we think that the middle class is losing ground to the top by, let's say, 3 to 5 basis points or something like that. Okay. I'd be interested to look at your research. But again, where's that information coming from? What are the data points? Chances are you're probably going to be able to tear it apart. And it's going to be a lot of juxtaposition of opinions and biases and thoughts about, well, if this has to happen, that has to happen, which isn't actually how life happens. So honest researchers are going to treat it as a range, not as a precise point. They're going to give us a trend. But think about it like this even. Let's say that wealth overall has increased. And let's say there's only 100 units of wealth. And let's say 75% of those units are owned by the wealthy and 25 are owned by the people who aren't considered wealthy, whatever that threshold is, if you could define it. And let's say that wealth over time increases and it goes from 100 to 200. So now there's 200 pieces of wealth out there. And you would expect, okay, it would grow in the same range. So the less wealthy would have 50 and the more wealthy would have 150 since everything doubled. Except for now the more wealthy we think have 160 and the less wealthy have 40. Well, the less wealthy still went from 25 to 40. So they still got better. So then the argument becomes, but the more wealthy got more stuff. And then the counter argument to that is, but how do you know? Because you can't track everything that the less wealthy have. It's a lot harder to track their stuff. It's a lot harder to track. If you are more wealthy, you are not relying on a pension. That's a small asset compared to your bigger assets. You're not relying on Social Security. That's a small asset compared to your bigger assets. You're not reliant on your 401k at work. That's a small asset compared to your other assets. When you're less wealthy, that stuff becomes more important. And a bunch of that stuff doesn't show up on any report anyplace. So here's kind of a takeaway, I guess, from this tangent. If you have ever felt anxious because the data says that you are behind, the truth is the data about you doesn't exist at all. Not at least in the way that it's being used. There might be tidbits of it, but they're comparing apples to oranges. You are being asked to compare your real life to a model based on somebody else's point of view. That's it. Hook, line, sinker, they got you though. So let's separate the facts from the feelings. It is easy to feel frustrated. I'm probably frustrating you right now. I'm frustrated. Everybody's frustrated. Everybody's pointing the finger at each other right now. Everybody's thinking they can't make it. The game's against them. It's rigged against them. They should just gamble. Put it all in black and roll the dice. Or whatever you do when you're gambling. I don't gamble, so I don't know. But maybe that's roulette, right? All in black or something. But when people get frustrated, they look to somebody to blame, which is why the powers that be might want you to be frustrated. It is comforting to know that you are not alone. If you are the only person with a problem, you are probably the problem. If everybody's got the problem, not your problem, you're a victim. They're in the same fight as you. You're fighting for them. You're pulling for them. They're pulling for you. And this is why the shrinking middle class story works so well. It's not because it's precise. It's because it's emotionally powerful. It's the opposite of precise. It's vague. Who the hell's the middle class? And why is it shrinking? How is it shrinking? What's shrinking? Are there less people in it? Is there less wealth in it? Compared to what? Because if you were to say that middle class and what we consider the wealthy class or the upper class compared to the lower class, that's not shrinking, that's increasing. We have less people in poverty. So it's confusing. It's a little bit confusing, but it's emotionally powerful. It gets you to react. It does three things at once. First, it implies that something is broken. Something's broken. We need to fix it. It suggests that somebody is to blame. This is somebody else's fault. This isn't your fault. This is somebody else's fault. Something's broken. We need to fix it. And it's because that person over there broke this. And that justifies your urgent action. Well, we just need this. Why every single time there's a car accident or there's a tragic death, we pass all these sweeping laws and we overregulate the heck out of people. Justifies urgent action. Look, we're doing something. We're moral people. We're doing something. We're trying to fix this situation. When you look in the mirror, I guarantee you don't look at yourself and go, I'm rich or poor. I can't guarantee it, but that should be something that you don't think of when you look in the mirror. I'm rich or poor. If somebody asks you to define your financial situation, you'd probably say, well, I have more than some and less than others. I'm somewhere in the middle. So when you hear that the middle class is under attack, you are included. You are concerned. You are ready to agree with a solution, whether it's for you or whether it's for somebody like you. And so over time, this framing has evolved. At first, it was the middle class is shrinking. It was vague and hard to argue. We just talked about that. Then we had the villain, the system, the elites, the out-of-touch bureaucrats. And no specifics, no details, because we don't want to alienate. Really what it comes down to is voters. It's about policy. We don't want to alienate anybody. So if we say the system, the middle class is shrinking because of the system or because of the elites or because of the out-of-touch bureaucrats, nobody's getting alienated. Nobody's getting upset with that statement because it makes sense. Yeah, sure. I would like more. I don't have enough. You'd always like more. That's the issue. It'd always be nicer for somebody else to have more. Maybe you feel I'm perfectly happy the way I am and where I'm at. Most people then switch to others. I want my kids to have more. I want my friends to have more. I support this charity because it helps people have more. And people can't have more because of the system, because of the elites, or because of the out-of-touch bureaucrats. So once that villain exists, now I need a hero. I need to elect somebody to save this for me, and they need to run on a policy of middle-class relief or protecting the middle class. It's a moral umbrella. It's a push to promote an agenda that both parties do. So this is apolitical. I don't care where you are, right or left of this, of your politics. Both parties, I'm going to save the middle class, or they're destroying the middle class. When the economy struggles, families are falling behind. Unless you're in power, in which case families are catching up. When the economy is strong, prosperity isn't reaching the middle class. Unless you're in charge, in which case you say, look what we're doing for the middle class. And since there's no definition of middle class, you can always show that somebody's distressed, which makes you always right. And distress creates fear, and fear sells, and that's a problem with politics. It's a pattern. We are responding as a population to stories, and stories are shaping our behavior. So we need to shift our mindset. Most people who move into the top 10% financially do not do it through luck. They do not do it waiting for a hero. They do not do it because of a policy change or something like that. They do it because they changed their scoreboard. They're not playing with the same scoreboard that you're playing with. They stop outsourcing their futures to narratives. They stop believing the garbage that they see on TV, and they start managing controllable variables like this. Income structure beats income level. Your salary, variable compensation, equity, ownership, the stuff that you get paid for the job you do, that is more important than how much you get paid. People don't understand that. but the structure of your income is more important than the amount of your income. Ownership beats effort. Business equity, stock-based compensation, real assets. Are we working harder or are we working smarter? This is the same mentality for your own situation. If you're not building to own, if you're not owning things, if you're relying on handouts and stuff like that, if you're falling for this is an investment, even though it builds no asset for you type of jargon that's out there about a lot of stuff that's going on financially, you don't own anything. So you can work as hard as you want. If nobody cares about your work, you're not going to make any money on it. The whole follow your heart and do what you love, that only works to a certain degree. Maybe you go do what you're good at that you can make money on, and then that money gives you the ability to follow your heart and do what you love. Maybe you've got it backwards. It's not always about kumbaya and I get to do what I love every day and make a ton of money. Sometimes you don't get to make a lot of money doing what you love. But if you make a ton of money, then you can do what you love, and you've got to figure out that equation for yourself. Time and consistency beat timing. Discipline wins championships. It's been on every poster since I was a kid. Discipline wins championships. Time and consistency are the key to discipline, right? Practice, 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 practice. Yeah, here comes Robin Hood, and here comes getting rich overnight gambling and NFTs and crypto and everything else, where if you just have the right timing, the game's over, you win, super easy. But then once you have all that, you're terrified somebody's going to take it from you. How about we get back to consistency over time and having discipline so we can build a championship money business for ourselves? Championship level money business, right? Maybe dynasty level money business. Not just you, your kids, and their kids, and so on. Rules reward behavior, not opinions. Opinions come and go. Rules stick around. Understand what the incentives are. Use them the way that they're designed, or avoid them because of their design, one or the other, but understand them. And understand also, because of the way that our politics work and whatnot, rules can change. Do not be so stuck in the mud in the way that you do things. Rules have a way of morphing over time. It's kind of like genetics and stuff. It just kind of changes as you go. So be aware that what worked in 1980 may not work today anymore. But certainly the opinion from yesterday morning probably is going to be wrong by tomorrow morning. So separate opinions from rules, because the rules are going to reward your behavior, but also understand the fact that the rules are going to change over time. And then you've got risk managed is not risk avoided. And I see this with people all the time. They're so risk averse. They want to avoid risk. They've got what they've got, and they just want to hold on to it so tight. If you avoid risk completely, you can't complain about the outcome. Nobody gets to the top 10% without risk. Nobody stays in the top 10% without risk. There's risk everywhere in your life. You walk out the door in the morning, there's risk that you may not come home. I see this with investors all the time. They've been investing their entire lives. They're 60, 70 years old. Now all of a sudden they don't want any risk. Well, you can't complain that you don't make any money then. You can't complain about inflation. You can't complain about anything. You stop taking risk, you stop complaining, period. You have to take a certain amount of risk. Now, you have to take smart risk. You have to understand risk. That goes back to the rules of the game. But you can't avoid risk and win. It doesn't work that way. You got to take the last shot in order to make the buzzer beater. You can't score the last point if you never take the shot. I grew up in a small town. All we talked about was what happened yesteryear. All the industry that used to be there. All the jobs that used to be there. What used to be on a certain street. Who used to live there. Yesterday's economy ain't never coming back. It's gone. It's dead. Forget about it. Doesn't matter. There's only today and moving forward. We cannot live stuck in the past trying to recreate the past the way that the past was. You have to figure out the path moving forward. You have to figure out the rules now moving forward. You have to think about the resources now you have that are accessible to you moving forward. When they put a model out there and they say, this is how you compare it to the old model. Who gives a damn? You don't live in that world. You don't know if it's right or wrong, but it doesn't matter because you weren't there. Or if you were there, it doesn't matter because you're no longer there. All that matters is how we address our current and future situation. So here's our shift that we need to be making in the mind. We are not a consumer of political stories or stories that are pushing political narratives. We need to get that out of our head no matter what aisle you sit in. You are the operator of a household enterprise, a money business. You need to make profit and you need to build assets. Ditch the Suits is not about proving the system is fair or unfair. It's about learning the working rules and applying them deliberately. It is for those who believe in hard work, those who care about their family, and those who want more out of their money and life.